Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Hannah Meisel, longtime State House watcher and correspondent. Welcome, Hannah.
Glad to be here.
And also Jerry Nowicki, State House Bureau Chief for Capitol News, Illinois. Welcome, Jerry.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
Last week, something finally hit that folks had been expecting to hit for some period of time, and that was the award of dispensary licenses for folks who want to sell marijuana over the counter legally in Illinois, pursuant to the state making recreational marijuana legal on January 1st. This first rollout of licenses did not go over well with a number of folks. There were something around 4,000 applications that were filed by something like 400 plus folks, many of whom filed multiple applications. I don't want just one store. I want 10, I want 20, I want 30, however many they want. When the dust settled, out of those 400 plus applicants, something like, well, exactly 21 were granted licenses or were granted the ability to continue in the process. Licenses have not been granted. The idea of just 21 out of so many applicants making it to the second round has upset some folks. How big of a deal might this be, particularly since Governor J.B. Pritzker has often, referred to the marijuana legislation and his administration. This is a kind of marquee stuff for the governor. We're going where no other state has gone before. We're the first state in the union to legalize recreational marijuana legislatively as opposed to pursuant to a voter mandate. And now this has happened. How big of a problem might this be for the governor? Jerry, Hannah, go ahead.
I think it's a pretty big deal. I mean, the cannabis legalization and decriminalization bill was the biggest piece of legislation, arguably. I mean, there was a lot that happened last spring, 2019.
Sure.
But it was a huge deal. Again, first in the nation to do it like this through legislative means. The women who crafted the bill were adamant that it was, equity focused.
Sure.
And, I've had candid conversations with, them throughout the summer, like back in June. Toya Hutchinson, who left the Senate to, to administer this legalization rollout in the governor's office last year. I spoke to her in June and she said flat out, we never expected hundreds and hundreds of people to apply for this first round. Now, I think what's getting a little bit lost here, and I'm not trying to minimize it, is that the state can eventually support up to 500 dispensaries and, more auxiliary businesses like grow houses and transportation businesses and the like, infusion businesses. But this, aside from allowing the medical marijuana companies that have already been operating in Illinois for several years to have the first set of licenses, and those are the dispensaries that were able to open recreationally on January 1st. This first set of social equity applicants, they're called, they were supposed to get 75 licenses. And what happened was they never expected so many people to apply, and they said, the tiebreaker, it's a little technical, but the tiebreaker language that they put into the law, they realized it maybe wouldn't break as many ties as they thought. And so they had to draft an emergency rule to break those ties, and it's basically a lottery. And the folks, people were very worried, and this also delayed because those dispensary licenses were supposed to be granted all the way back on May 1st.
Sure.
And here we are in early September, and now only, would you say 21, one outright, and then the rest of them have to go through this lottery process.
Well, no, there's 21. Let's be candid. I perhaps misspoke. There's 21 that are eligible for the lottery. No licenses, and there were so many ties that no licenses can be given outright, because what has happened is that the state has been divided into regions, I believe 17, and with different numbers of licenses available in each different region. In the Chicago area, for example, 47 licenses are available. In Springfield, from where we're broadcasting, 1 license is available, and that's through this year. There's an additional round of applications that are expected next year. The issue is that for folks I have talked to, at least, is that some of these folks have qualified for 38 chances in the lottery, some of them 20 chances in the Chicago area alone. And as it's been explained to me, as long as you pay, I think it's an application fee of $2,500 per application, you get a ping pong ball in the basket. And that has some folks upset.
Right.
In fact, it has minority legislators saying, some minority legislators saying, don't do this lottery. This isn't fair. There's a lawsuit was filed the day after. Jerry, at this point in time, what does it mean that we've got folks who are in the Black Caucus, and there had been warning signs heading up to this. Some aldermen in Chicago had expressed concerns when lotteries were held in the Windy City to determine locations, and a bunch of white guys showed up. And that had some heads scratching. At this point in time, Jerry, how do you recover? What can you do? Is a lottery going to be postponed? I mean, or are we now doomed to a mass of litigation?
I mean, that's the courts will be what you kind of got to watch here to see how how those cases progress, but it seems like the letter of the law was followed. I don't know what type of case they're going to have. It is jarring when you see 21 applicants are going to get the 75 licenses. So, many of them will get multiple licenses, and then you're just further conglomerating the ownership of the industry rather than diversifying it, like you kind of was the goal in the legislation. Yeah. And I think that the fact that the Black and Latino caucuses are really throwing up the red flags is not a good look when this is supposed to be, and it has been sold as the most equity-centric marijuana legalization proposal that exists so far. But yeah, like Hannah said, there's hundreds of more licenses that'll get granted eventually. Right. I don't know if maybe they'll be more diversified in the future. But it's not a good look when you have someone like Representative Chris Welch from Chicago saying, stop digging your hole deeper, fix this now before we give out any of these licenses. There's some questions of the consulting firm or auditing firm, whichever they are, I think it's KPMG, that they were given a $4.2 million no-bid contract to do the grading, and some of the grading could be more subjective than people would like, saying, I should have gotten these points, explain to me why I didn't on this application that has now edged me out of the lottery. So, I mean, the 21 groups getting licenses all qualified as social equity applicants in some regard under the letter of the law. So at this point, I think it's just going to be up to the courts, and I don't know what kind of case they do or don't have. I haven't delved in too deeply.
But the bottom line is it breaks a lot of trust. I remember during the debate on the floor in the House, several Black lawmakers, one in particular, Curtis Tarver from Chicago, he said, the only reason I trust and am voting for this law is that because I know that Christian Mitchell, a former legislator, big member of the Black Caucus, now in the governor's office as deputy governor, of course, was working on it. And just again, the trust has been broken several times over, and that's going to be hard to repair. Not necessarily impossible, but it's just one more thing that the governor's office is having to deal with that, arguably could have been prevented in certain ways. Obviously, again, they claim that no one could have seen the huge deluge of applicants coming. I kind of feel like you could. But
yeah, well, I agree with you, Hannah. I think that you're right. Why didn't be, and I think you raise an excellent point when it comes to trust. Christian Mitchell, who was the governor's point person on this, did have, I mean, he's a former legislator. He's super smart. He had, I think, enjoyed a lot of trust with folks, and this has kind of gone kablooey. And also got Toy Hutchinson, who was the former state senator, who kind of, shepherded this through the legislative process. She was there. It's not, I think, too much of a stretch to call her to say she was instrumental in this bill getting past the legislature. She went from a $70,000 a year job as a state senator to a $220,000 a year job in the governor's office, advising him on cannabis issues. And so I don't want to, maybe accountability is too strong a word, but yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Hannah, also that folks say this was a big surprise. Well, why? Each application, as I understand it, costs $2,500. And you look at it in hindsight, and hindsight, as we know, is 2020. Why shouldn't we have expected entities to go through that and say, I know how government really works here. I can get a perfect application. I've just got to make sure I've got a veteran's benefit. Turned out to be hugely important. You got extra points if you had a veteran who was in an ownership position. It wasn't very many points, but as it turned out, every point counted. One applicant that I spoke to who wasn't successful said, this is kind of like SAT scores. Just because you did good on the SAT, does that mean you're going to do good in college? Mm-hmm. And I think it's an interesting question to ask. And we're also going to the fall veto session. Well, let's talk about that for a second. How might this influence the fall veto session, given that the Black Caucus has said, you know what, we have things that we want to accomplish here in terms of police accountability, social equity, economic development, given the unrest. Does this have any potential to throw a monkey wrench into those sorts of efforts?
Yes, I mean, when you try to take on too many things in a short period of time, I mean, we've all seen that. But we've also, when it comes to the legislature, we've seen tremendous feats be accomplished. But it's really difficult. And I actually kind of feel like instead of throwing a wrench in the process, I kind of feel like it gives the Black Caucus more leverage in all of the other items that they want to do on their agenda. But
it's a wrench that works in the caucus's favor.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And does the timing of the election, I mean, what happens between now and the start of the veto session, which is after the fall election? I mean, how can the Black Caucus and others who want to get their agendas accomplished in the veto session, how can they, what sorts of assurances can they get? Because as you point out, Hannah, lawmaking is a matter of trust. I mean, and so these lawmakers go to the governor's office and said, I trusted you before, and this happened. What kind of solid assurances can they expect or should they get coming into the veto session?
I don't know, Joe, you want to take that one?
Go ahead,
it'll be interesting to watch. The governor has said, he and former Senator Hutchinson, Advisor Hutchinson, have sort of said they're not planning on stalling these licenses, at least the first round. What'll be interesting to see in the veto session is if they come up with rule changes or whatever for future rounds of licenses when there's hundreds more to be added. And the only thing I could see stopping this round of licenses is the lawsuit.
Well, there's that, and there's also political will. And let's not forget, there's also 40 growing licenses in play that were supposed to have been awarded on July 1st. That's also been delayed. And so those presumably are going to be awarded at some point. And the procedures are very similar to what happened with the dispensary. Is this, or could another shoe fall here?
Well, and I think it's going to be, the grow are going to be as important as anything, because even if you get a dispensary license as a social equity applicant or as a new entrant into the market, you are still buying the marijuana from some of these places that have been set up as medical growers for so long. You're buying it from the established players. You're only enriching them. You might make some money off of it too, but The established growers are going to be the ones setting the price and determining how much profit anyone makes, really. So the grow licenses will be important, and you might see some type of action on that.
Yeah. Let's move on for them, because marijuana, of course, isn't the only issue involving green that confronts folks in Illinois. Just picking at random, we'll hold on to the progressive income tax measure for just a second here. Hannah, give us an update. We're broadcasting, or we're taping this for on Thursday. This is the first meeting of the House Investigative Committee, which is charged with looking into any sorts of hints of impropriety involving House Speaker Mike Madigan. They met this morning. They've adjourned. Is that correct? What happened, and what's next?
Right. It was a pretty short meeting, and it got kind of hung up on the fact that the Democrats, who obviously, they've worked with Speaker Madigan for years, so Freudian slip.
For decades. Go ahead.
Yes, for decades. Sorry. And so they said, well, we need to make sure that what we're doing here doesn't interfere with what the U.S. Attorney is doing in their federal probe. And I was reminded of, in 2006, then Attorney General Lisa Madigan, her office was asked to stop, halt their investigation into Rod Blagojevich's hiring practices so that the federal probe could go forward. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And so
I was reminded of the same thing, but go ahead, let me interrupt.
And so what happened was they agreed to, they voted to send a letter to the U.S. Attorney with, asking for guidance, but House Minority Leader Jim Durkin said, well, we already asked and, informed the U.S. Attorney of what we're doing. So
let me interrupt here for a second. So the Democrats this morning said that we need to put the U.S. Attorney's on notice that we're holding these hearings that have been the subject of headlines for a week. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Representative Welch and Representative Demmer, the ranking Democrat and Republican on the committee, were going to either meet or discuss with Attorney John Lausch. I guess get his blessing to proceed in any certain way. And what was interesting to me was that there was no commitment to when the next committee hearing is going to take place.
Thank you, Jerry.
I don't know how long they're going to draw that out. I don't know how quickly the attorney's office will respond. I don't know how anything will proceed. I don't know if this is an effort to slow things down rather than give the Republicans the weekly hearings they're looking for at this point. I couldn't get a sense of how things will play out from after that very brief committee, but I know the Republicans.
I think Welch at the beginning did not Representative Welch at the very beginning. I believe he told this to Capital News Illinois, saying we're going to proceed as quickly as possible or as soon as possible. Were words to that effect used?
Yeah, he did say that.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah.
All right. And so the first step is asking the U.S. Attorney if it's okay. Okay. So, and we have no second. That doesn't sound like a committee to me that's really in a rush to get from point A to wherever point B might be. Is my skepticism warranted?
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, Democrats are going to want to slow walk this. I mean, we have so much going on this fall. We have obviously the election, obviously veto session, and they also, if the federal probe were to ultimately catch the speaker in a dragnet, Democrats need to figure out among themselves, how do they move forward?
Sure, but Hannah, if go back to 2006. If the U.S. Attorney thought they had a viable case that was going to go somewhere, wouldn't they have told Durkin, nope, we got this, just stay tuned? That didn't happen, apparently. But go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, if he does ultimately get caught up in this, and it's the final nail in the coffin for his career, then there's a huge power vacuum. And, his ruling with an iron fist, that's the only way that he's, especially in recent years, kept the more moderate Democrats and the progressive Democrats from all out warring at each other like we've seen in the National Democratic Party.
Yeah. And I wonder also too, this isn't just about Madigan. Let's be clear about this. This is a committee that's composed of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and we're in election season. Grant Worley, one of the Republicans on the committee, is been seen as, well, he might be a little bit vulnerable. How much might the Democrats be fearing damage to Madigan as much as they might fear, hey, this is a soapbox to Republicans to make points? Is that something worth thinking about?
That's a consideration for anything that goes on in this realm. How many headlines you're going to get, whose clips will be in the 2-minute news segment on the issue. Everything's political, especially when it pertains to Speaker Madigan. He's always had a good sense of how to mute controversy. And while he's, of course, supposedly recused from this process, it's not likely that the 3 Democrats on the committee are going to flip, so to speak, on him. As Hannah says, it all comes down to whether we see a charge. That changes everything if we see a federal charge.
Yeah, we didn't see Kelly Cassidy, for example, put on this committee, or some other folks that have criticized Madigan.
Right.
And that perhaps, and not surprisingly, might speak volumes. We promised we were going to talk about a different form of green eventually. And so let's talk about Ken Griffin, the richest man in Illinois, with an estimated net worth of, is it 15 billion? Is that right?
Something like that.
Something like that. More than us put together.
I think when you get past 1 billion, what does it matter?
Well, you go look at somebody like J.B. Pritzker, who might be a little bit behind. But one thing that J.B. Pritzker is not behind on is contributions to the flat tax campaign. The governor has given, I believe, in excess of $50 million to the effort to promote the graduated income tax. And Ken Griffin this week gave $20 million to the other side. It's been estimated that Ken Griffin's tax burden would increase by $45 million if this passes. So is $20 million all he's going to give? Is just for the sake of the good college try, or are we going to see? Is this going to boil down to essentially a battle of billionaires? These guys throw money to put up the ads, and nobody else puts up any real scratch because we're in a presidential year and money's tight.
Yeah, it's definitely money at this point. Defining that issue in the 1 or 2 sentences that the voters who may not be paying much attention would take to the polls with them. Money's, I don't know, this issue. The big thing for the opponents is that you really need 60% per se, pretty much, of the vote to get this passed. So you're looking to peel off a supermajority, basically. So the money could go a long way in that regard.
Yeah, and it's not a gimme. I don't think really for either side. I mean, we're looking, for example, at an unprecedented election. As of this week, I believe 1.3 million absent or vote by mail ballots have been requested. That 5.5 million people cast votes in the last presidential election in Illinois. The deadline to apply for a vote by mail ballot isn't until, I believe, the end of October. So we're facing a scenario potentially where almost half, maybe even better than half, if this keeps going the way it's going, could vote by mail. And how do you, if you are a J.B. Pritzker or a Ken Griffin, how do you get your message across? How does all the money in the world do that, and when do you spend it? Because folks can start mailing ballots in long before November.
Right. I think one of the things that I feel like hasn't been reported on enough is that the governor's, what he set up this independent committee, and they yell at me when I say he set it up, they did.
I believe you, Hannah.
To promote his quote unquote fair tax is they also concurrently set up, a website and literature around mailing in, requesting your vote by mail ballot. And so the two things go in tandem, and they have this very streamlined process. So, the 20 million coming now, I thought was a little bit curious. Of course, we never know exactly when the check was written because you can report it at any time, basically. But I mean, get ready for the airwaves have already been pretty blanketed, but we're going to see Florida State.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can probably expect that 20 million to pay for some outreach, but I think we might also expect it to pay for some polling, and perhaps the results, not surprisingly, of that polling might dictate what future contributions may come. That said, I welcome, of course, both of your contributions, your fabulous guests, and thanks for being here. But we are unfortunately out of time. And so thanks everybody for joining us this week, and we'll see you again next week on Capitol View.